Well, first I wanted to quickly gauge, we have a small group, so I want to quickly gauge the group in the room. So if you think yourself as like a developer, engineer, or programmer, could you raise your hand? Okay, let's say. Okay. If you think of yourself as like a biologist or a chemist, raise your hand. Okay. And then just like interested in molecular machines, but I don't work on science. Anyone like that? Okay, great. And what's your background in, for example?
Technology strategy for the country.
For the country?
Yeah.
Okay. And then how about your background?
Science philanthropy.
Science philanthropy. Okay, got it. So, yeah, so I guess I was going to sort of shuffle the topic based on what's most relevant to everyone. But since it's Vision Weekend, we can do Fireside, but maybe I just give the broad sort of vision of what Latch is and why am I even talking and why do you guys care?
Yes, what is Latch? Why does it matter to us?
Let's start there. Great question. So basically, let's start from like the broadest vision here, like what's actually going on in the world, right? So a few things. Number one, there is a huge push towards personalized medicine. And so what do I mean by personalized medicine? So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the use of genomics to understand what's going on in cells and understand how DNA and RNA work. The average biologist today is trying to discover a new set of therapies that are going to become a much more personalized version of medicine for people. So basically, healthcare is undergoing a very big change. So if you think of when you go to the doctor 10 or 20 years from now, ideally what's going to happen is they're going to sequence your genome and give you a targeted therapy based on your specific biology. What's going wrong with you? So if you develop a certain type of cancer, they will sequence your genome, understand what's going on, or sequence that tumor, understand what's going on, and give you a very personal therapy that works for you and not for the average population. Okay, so Obama ran his whole campaign on this. This is like personalized medicine, right? That's one very big track. The other one is sequencing itself. So sequencing is a way to understand what's going on in a cell. It's the most like high fidelity way to understand what's going on in a cell. And it's become...
Actually, we want to know about relative protein abundance. We don't just want to know about DNA. We want to know about state, not just fate.
Good point, yes. So we want to know many things about what's going on in the cell. But the reason I highlight sequencing is that it went from what was previously $1 billion to sequence a genome to now like $1,000 or $100. Okay, so the cost of sequencing has decreased exponentially. And what this means at a high level is that it's going to kind of change the way healthcare works in the future and change the way therapeutics work in the future. Okay, now how does that relate back to you guys? Well, each one of us knows a family member who developed some kind of cancer. Both my grandparents died from cancer, bladder cancer and breast cancer. And then my other grandma died from heart disease. So we know heart disease is a very big problem. And then we may have friends who have cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, rare genetic diseases where their life expectancy is 20 instead of 70 or 80. So these are all caused by underlying issues with the mechanisms of biology. This is the big picture. How can we cure these diseases? Okay. Medium picture is that there's this whole new generation of biotech companies. Are people here interested in biotech and biotech industry? Okay. Yes. There's this whole new generation of biotech companies, there's thousands of them today, which are doing drug discovery to find the next new therapeutic that's a cell therapy or a gene therapy. And what this means is, this is the personalized medicine. These new biotech companies are figuring out how to use biology to cure biological diseases themselves, right? So with all these companies, they're generating a buttload of data, a lot of data. When they sequence a genome, it's like 100 gigabytes or 50 gigabytes of data for every genome they sequence, every cell they sequence. So these companies that are trying to cure these diseases are dealing with this deluge of massive amounts of data, and they don't know what to do with it, right? That's the medium picture. So let's ground this in a very concrete example. We all saw the COVID pandemic over the last few years, right? And very quickly, we had to learn how to diagnose and detect COVID in a person. So let's go to one specific scientist, and this will relate to what Latch is doing and why we're building the platform we're building. One scientist during the COVID pandemic was able to use our platform to detect COVID variants in 25,000 patients by herself on a computer. And the way she was able to do this is that you guys know when you do the nasal swabs, which would then get submitted off to a lab to sequence that and see what kind of COVID you have, what variant of COVID you have. When that data is generated, the modern scientist has no idea what to do with it because they don't have the skills to process the DNA found on that nasal swab. So what they do is they send that DNA, that data, off to a data engineering team, which processes it and sends it back to them. But that process can take like a month or 2 months in some cases. It's a very bespoke analysis. So instead of that 2-month process of detecting COVID from these samples, we are building a software platform that let that one scientist drag and drop all those COVID sample data into her browser on her computer, click analyze, and then 20 minutes later, she has results of every single patient and the variant of COVID that they have, right? Okay, so this is one example of the application of Latch, and so that gets to what is Latch. And hopefully I put some color into like why is this important and why do you guys care, right? So bringing that now to what is Latch, if you go to our website, it's LatchBio. We are basically building data and cloud infrastructure for biology and for bioinformatics, so that your everyday biologist that's sitting in a lab can basically run these very complicated analysis workflows in their browser at the click of a button. And the idea is to really, for any kind of assay, any kind of biological research question you need to answer, whatever data you generate in the lab, you store it on Latch, and this can be hundreds of terabytes of raw sequencing data. You organize it into different projects, experiments, and samples on Latch, and then you analyze it with basically a set of different workflows. So you click on a workflow, you click run, and then you generate the insight for that data set that you're looking for. Okay, so we've been building this for about 2 years. I want to bring it back to you all and see what people are most interested in, but I started this in undergrad with 2 other friends, Kenny Workman, my CTO, who couldn't make it today, and Alfredo Anderi, my CEO. Alfredo was working at Google. Kenny was working at a biotech company. I was working in a neuroscience research lab. The 3 of us came together. We noticed this problem. We dropped out of school. Our moms were pissed. And then we started building this. And today we have about 3,000 scientists using it and about 30 biotech companies using it. And a few of the biotech companies are here at the Foresight conference this week. So yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Any questions from the audience?
Question. So from what I've seen, it seems like people have very bespoke problems they're trying to solve when they're looking at these sequencing data sets and sort of high throughput assay results in general. So how do you go about sort of like distilling down the kinds of use cases that will scale to a lot of different users or something like that?
That's a really good question, yeah. So it actually tends to relate to like what papers have the most citations and what are the most proven methods to get insight from sequencing data.
Okay.
So one would be like RNA sequencing data. You're able to tell what genes are being expressed in this cell or this sample. And there's like a common set of papers which characterize how to do this. You take in the data set, you process it through these 10 steps, you get this final result which shows you gene expression. So we'll go talk to all these biotech companies and we'll be like, what assays, what analyses are you guys running? And they're like, oh, we're running the one from this paper. And we're like, oh, okay. Well, of the 30 companies we talked to, 20 of them are running the one from this paper. Let's build that one. And then we build it. And then we test it with them.
So is there a way to get IP protection on that, or is it sort of like because it's published in this paper, you're building a thing that your ownership over it is the network effects of it. People are using your platform and it works.
Yeah, totally. And it's open, so
yeah.
There's no IP. Like anyone can use this. Any biologist, any scientist in the world can use this.
Okay, that makes sense.
Good question.
Who else is doing similar things to what Latch is doing, and why are you better? If you could make an argument for yourself.
For sure, absolutely. So there are these incumbent software companies that have tried to do this for the last 15 years. Examples are called DNA Nexus or 7 Bridges. And it's the type of company where you go to their website, you try and figure out how to use this platform to process your sequencing data, and it says request a demo. And then you request a demo, you get referred to the sales team. And then you talk to the sales team, but they don't show you the product. They qualify you. And then you go into another call, and another call. You've gone through 5 calls, and then they give you the price of the software, and it's $300,000. The existing platforms are super enterprisey, extremely hard to use, and your average biologist in a research lab can't use them unless they pay $300,000. So one thing that I think differentiates us is it's free and open to use for any scientist. If you go to our website, like you can click try now, and like you just try the product. Gets back to tech trees, right? Like anyone should be able to just try it and create their own tech tree, right?
Should be.
Yeah. It's the same thing here. Anyone should be able to go and run a workflow. So yeah, I would say that's probably one of the main things that differentiates
More
us.
accessible.
More accessible, easier to use. Yeah.
How
What's
did
the
you guys-
monetization model then?
Great question. Yeah. So have you heard of AWS or these big cloud providers? So it's free for academic nonprofit research labs, but for biotech companies, we work with about 30. It's a usage-based model like AWS. So they pay for the amount of data they store, and then the computers they're spinning up, they pay for those computers. Yeah.
Is there a mechanism to share the data between different labs?
Oh man, this is a hot topic. Because no biotech company in the world wants to share their data.
I know.
But I personally don't like that. And I would like a future in which biotech securely can share the failed experiments they ran and share data sets they generated that are helpful for each other. Have you heard of elucidata?
No.
Okay. So one of the big problems in research right now is you go to a paper and you find this interesting research they did, and you want to get the data that they generated from the paper. It's actually really hard to get an accurate, good data set out of papers. Like, you have to go to these weird links and install it locally on your computer, and oftentimes the data is not annotated or it's in different formats. It's really hard. So one way of solving this is a company called Elucidata. What they do is they take let's say 1,000 papers that have all published single-cell research, and they will extract the data set out of these papers and normalize the data set so they're all in the same exact format. So they're all shareable, and you can analyze it in the same way. And what we did is we partnered with them to make those data sets accessible on our platform. So it's an early step in what you're talking about, but we're trying to do that. Yeah.
How did you get into this field? You're pretty young and fresh. It looks like. So
I'm only
what-
17.
You're- That's a joke.
I'm just kidding. I'm 24.
What did you just see this as a good opportunity, or was this something you were personally interested in? How did you arrive at that?
I think I've just been personally really interested in the brain and biology for a long time. Since I was a kid, I always wanted to understand how the brain worked. And so I studied neuroscience in undergrad to try and figure that out. And I also saw my family members sometimes acting crazy, so I really want to understand
Right? That's good motivation.
how did the brain work. Yeah, very personal motivations. And then I was really inspired doing research. Anyone ever do biology research in school or undergrad? You've done a lot of biology research. You've done research. Scientists are just very earnest, and they really want to understand how things work, and then solve problems, solve diseases. And so those are the types of people I like to be around. And so I was I want to solve problems that I feel in the lab and that other people in labs feel. But I didn't know what it would be yet. But that's sort of the motivation, how it started for me. Yeah.
We have a lot of those kinds of people here at
Yeah.
Foresight. It's a Foresight type person. Do you have any other questions?
I do, Kyle. If you were to just think about a moonshot in your space, so just hunches you have, and it might be hard to say them on the spot, but based on what you've seen, if you were to say, if we were going to move the whole innovation ecosystem to a place of glory, with this goal in your space, what comes to mind?
So I'll give you the more out there answer and then the more practical answer.
Perfect.
Okay. The more out there one is, I think we've all been a bit taken aback by the pace of like language models and AI models being released recently for all kinds of applications that are not in research. But these models could be very useful for understanding sequences of information in biology. And so you have like, obviously AlphaFold is a very canonical example. But AI models like AlphaFold that are able to almost perfectly predict how information flows in a biological system, and then giving those to any researcher in the world. Like AlphaFold is open source. Anyone in the world can use that. It's crazy. And then we actually put those on our platform, so now there's a no-code UI where you can click a button to run AlphaFold. So it's even easier. So I think putting those really powerful models in the hands of scientists could like totally change drug discovery. Because drug discovery right now is a very manual like process of mining through data sets to like find what you're looking for. That's the out there answer. And the practical one is like, you guys would be blown away at how like terrible the infrastructure in biology and like pharma is. For example, many pharma companies still use spreadsheets, physical hard drives, local servers, like paper in some cases, like straight up paper. And so the more practical, like gold standard I see is just how do we get all their data in one easy to use, searchable, queryable system? Because this will just accelerate the rate of how these people run their experiments and how they do their work. So that's, I think, the more practical one.
Related to that, you mentioned AlphaFold. And if you said like, what was it that allowed DeepMind to do that? I think there were at least 3 preconditions. Number one is you had a very well-defined problem. How do you go from amino acid sequence to 3-dimensional protein structure? That leverages the fact that machine learning is really good at creating a universal function approximation that maps between the input and the output. You had the existence of the protein data bank, which the federal science agencies have been supporting for decades. And if you were a researcher, you couldn't publish without depositing your protein structure in the protein data bank. And number 3, you had CASP, which was the metric that people used to evaluate the accuracy of different machine learning approaches.
Yep.
So the question is like, is there something like the protein data bank that would do for some other field of biology and chemistry what the protein data bank plus CASP did to create the preconditions necessary for DeepMind to put a team of 18 people and essentially unlimited compute to create AlphaFold 2. So I think that's an interesting question.
Completely agree. There's something about getting a very talented group of people focused on a very narrow problem like that, and they have the data to do it. So, yeah.
I had a sort of like somewhat, I guess, practical or pragmatic question. How often when you're working with these like biotech companies, do you find that like, because I've done a little bit of work in this space, and it seemed that people were always like, you're like, oh, we're gonna put the data on the cloud, and they're like, but confidentiality, like it's patient data, so it's like this like crazy levels of encryption they require, and like really like audits and everything. Is that something that you've run into very much with working with the biotech companies?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Privacy is the utmost concern for them because their IP is everything, and like they heard of these like celebrity cloud leaks in like 2012 and 2014 that like tarnished the reputation of cloud infrastructure, right? So I think Benchlink's done a lot of really good work to dispel those myths, and AWS has done a lot of really good work to get people to trust storing their data on buckets in the cloud. Another really cool technical thing that we've done is, so building off the backs of the security and robustness that AWS has, we've allowed people to bring their data that's already stored in a cloud provider, like AWS, into our platform without us actually storing it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Smart. Yeah.
They still manage it, they still own it, they still store it. We just have access to process it for them.
Okay.
That was a big breakthrough, and most companies really like that model, so we'll probably keep with that.
So there's like that's like the architecture solution. You can do it in such a way that actually you never see their data. Like
we
don't
don't
prove to
store it,
them
we
that
don't
you never
keep it.
see their data.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Is that using federated learning or a different technical approach?
Federated learning.
Yeah.
No, it's using we created this IAM role, like basically a permissions role to access the data in their bucket. And then we process the data and return it back to their bucket. So it's just like a technical solution. Great question. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the future of Latch?
Okay.
Ideal,
What is a good plan? What's the master
ideal,
plan?
and worst case scenario.
A higher CAC to LTV ratio.
Lower, I guess.
Yeah, good point. So I think the future of Latch, quite honestly, over the last 7 months, we've gone from having like 7 partners to over 30. And I think if we keep this pace, we'll have like almost 100 companies that are using our platform over the next like year. And the future that I see that matters a lot to me is that we're able to bring just like a really modern, awesome software stack that scientists love to use to every company. Every pharma company, every biotech company, there's thousands of them. And they're all using outdated, shitty tools. So like really distribution is probably one of the biggest ones. The other thing is building like a really talented engineering team. So Kenny, who was supposed to be here today to give this talk actually, is our CTO. Definitely one of the best engineers I've ever met in my life. Been a bioengineer since he was 15, turned into a computer scientist. And he leads our engineering team, so one thing he wanted me to channel to you guys was, tell everyone if they want to work on extremely hard problems at the intersection of biology and computer science with a really highly motivated engineering team, to reach out to him.
Okay.
So
You're hiring.
So we are hiring, yeah. But I would say those 2 things, building the best engineering team in biotech, and then really getting these tools in the hands of scientists across the industry.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.